Welcome. We are in the eve of Chavish Asar B'Shvat, which is Rosh Hashanah Lanes. It's the new year for trees. Very special time. We know that man is compared to the tree in the field in many, many ways, including the fact that the tree has very strong roots. And similarly, we have to be in tune with our roots and make sure that they're strong. When the roots are strong, the tree can grow very tall and very strong. We are continuing with Hilchos Shabbos, and we're in the Kitzur of Hilchos Shabbos of the Alter Rebbe, Siman Reish Gimel Dash Dalid. Shehiyah B'Taner. We're continuing to discuss the halachas about leaving something which is already cooked on the stove before Shabbos, so you have hot food on Shabbos. We discussed that it has to be in a situation where today it's called a blech, but there are no coals there, the fire is moved away, it's cleaned out, and you're not concerned that a person may by mistake decide to increase the flame. What about an oven? So shehiyah b'taner, taner shepischei min hatzad. If you have an oven that the opening of the oven is from the side, which is unlike the ovens which used to exist, the olden day ovens, dinei shava lekira. Then it's like a stove. Then you could also leave things in an oven in the ways that we prior mentioned regarding to a stove, which include covering, make sure there's no fire that's open, and there's no concern that you may increase the flame and so on. Hashab be'isur. What happens if, regarding all these halachas that we said, that you can only put things onto the stove after it's already cooked, and you have to make sure that it's covered and the fire is not open, and various different conditions or details how it's allowed. What happens if somebody did it anyways by mistake, or someone else did it, but they put food on the stove before Shabbos, even on a blech, and it wasn't cooked? So he says like this: Kol makom shenis bayir she'asur lahashes tavshel al akira. In any place that we explained that you cannot put food on a stove, in whatever various scenario that it is before Shabbos, if a person did it anyways and he left it there, even if it was by mistake, he forgot it there, he was going to take it off before Shabbos, but he just forgot, or a different type of mistake, he thought that it was allowed. There's different types of mistakes, right? You can make a mistake and say that I was going to take it off, or I didn't even know that it was wrong. In such a case, the dish, he's not allowed to eat it. You can't eat it yourself on Shabbos, and you can't give it to someone else to eat. You have to wait enough time after Shabbos ends to prepare this food, how long it takes for it to be cooked fully to be able to eat. And this is important because mistakes do happen, and you can't eat it on Shabbos. Even after Shabbos, you have to wait. We also discussed multiple times this term, Michael ben Drusai, which is named after a thief or robber who's always on the run, and therefore he's eating food that's not fully cooked. And we're using that as a term to talk about food that's not fully ready for Shabbos, fully ready. It's not fully edible. It's edible. It's not fully cooked. What's that amount? Is it a third? Is it halfway? So Shir Michael ben Drusai lechatchila tzarach lizar sheyispashal chatzib b'sholim v'yayim. Lechatchila, the preferred way, is that this dish should be cooked at least half cooked during the day before Shabbos starts. So it's edible. It's not your preferred way of eating, but it's edible. I will be the yevet, but if after the fact and in certain circumstances, even if at least a third was cooked before Shabbos started, again, this references different scenarios that we spoke about. If it's cooked a little bit, it's at least a third cooked, then with the evidence, fine, it should be cooked to halfway. This all is connected to the Gezerah, a decree that even though you're not technically cooking because it's cooking on its own, but we don't want a person to start increasing the flame on Shabbos, so it should be cooked faster or better for the Shabbos meal. He's running out of time, so he wants to make the flame higher. Okay, we're now talking about another aspect to all of these halachas, which is very, very common and very practical. What's the halacha about putting back food onto the stove on Shabbos? You have food, it's already cooked, or it's not yet cooked. What's the deal with putting it back on? You took out some of your cholent, you want to put it back on the stove. If a person took the stove, the food, the dish off the stove, whether it was Friday, which is a little bit more complicated, or it was on Shabbos itself. And now you want to turn it, you put it back, right? You have a pot of soup. You want to have a little soup before, you want to give the kids soup before the father comes home from shul. But you still need the soup on the blech because you want it to be hot for the meal. You want to put it back on. You're allowed to with the following conditions. With the very specific conditions, you're allowed to put it back. Hakira. What's with the stove itself? First of all, and perhaps very obviously, you could only put it back on a blech, meaning on a stove where the coals have already been taken away, and we're not concerned that you may increase it on Shabbos. But a stove which is not brushed away, taken away all the coals, also or covered. Also, you cannot put it back in any circumstances. The whole scenario of a blech is you put it on before Shabbos. But if you want to put something back on Shabbos, we're very concerned that you may start playing around with it, and therefore you cannot put it back unless it's really covered. Again, to clarify, if it's not grufo ktuma, there were certain cases, and certain opinions rather, that if it's fully raw and it's before Shabbos, even if it's not covered, we're not afraid you're going to touch it. We don't act that way. We always make sure there's a blech. But putting it back, we're very careful. Putting something back, you must have a blech according to all opinions, because we're afraid a person may increase it. Specifically to put it back on top of the stove from above it. But if you want to put it into the stove, which again, the olden day stoves had technically the ability to stick it in, even if it's already cleared up, you cannot do it. Now he has a footnote here, very interesting, and he says that today, regarding today's ovens, if you have a certain type of oven where it keeps the temperature, and it's not going to mess with the thermostat when you open and close it, you still cannot return it on Shabbos, even if it's grufo ketuma, meaning there's no open flame and everything's covered. Now, later on, he says that there are those that do it anyways, and they have what to rely on. There's certain opinions which say it's okay, and therefore you don't have to say anything if they're doing it, but it's better if you could be careful not to take in and out and back, put it back in itself. It's more than lechatchila. It seems that there's plenty, those that are putting it back in. You shouldn't do it, but in the next footnote he brings to it. Okay. But let's get back to the conditions. What are the conditions that a person is allowed to put something back onto the stove on Shabbos? It still has to be in your hand. You did not take it off. It's a very important distinction. You didn't take it off. You didn't take it out of your hand. You took the soup off the stove, and you're still holding it. And then you take out with a ladle, someone takes out with a ladle some soup, then you could put it back on. You hold it as long as you need to, and then put it back on. He brings here very interesting in the footnote that if you look closely at the words in Al Tareh B'Shulchan Aruch, he says that you didn't remove it from your hand, which means that if you want, you could lean the pot on a counter, on a table or something. You don't have to literally hold it in the air, as long as one hand is still holding this pot. So it doesn't mean holding it, it means not letting go. And then you could put it back onto the stove. V'gam, also very important, another aspect, another condition here is, you can't decide, I have a big pot, I'm going to pour a little bit out into a different pot and put that back on the stove, and then the original pot I'm going to take off. If you're changing the pots, you cannot put it back on, even if it's already cooked, even if it's still hot, even if it's a blech, everything, it has to be the same pot. And this is because we don't want it to look like cooking. I don't want to get too much into it, but he brings a footnote regarding foods that you want to add more hot water to it. It's very important, huh? Yeah, we have to give a little introduction of how when you could put hot water in and what scenarios. Right. So putting it back in, but it's basically important that you're putting it straight into the original pot. Let's do it with the words. We could point out the following. If you're going to add boiling water into, let's say, the cholent pot on Shabbos, you have to pour directly from the boiling water into this pot. But if you're first taking the water into another dish which is not on the fire, you can't pour from that one into the cholent dish. That's already considered moving it to another dish, and it's a problem. So it's very important when you put something back onto the fire. It's already cooked, as we'll see. You held the pot. You didn't switch pots. You didn't move it to a different dish. Then you can put it back up. In addition, you also have to have in mind that you're doing this. You didn't take it off and say, oops, maybe I'll put it back on. You took the pot off the stove. You had in mind to put it back on. By the fact that you thought about it, you kept it in mind, and that was your intent when you took it off. So now it's still the original shehiyah. It's not really considered putting something on the stove all over again, which would look like cooking, even though it's already cooked. Okay, so we have so far three major conditions besides the aspect of the stove itself and the aspect of blech. It has to be, you have to hold on to it. You can't switch it to a different dish, and you have to have in mind before you take it off that you're taking some, but you're putting it back on. Now, hatavsha, what's about the dish itself? It's extremely important because this could happen based on everything we said. The food has to be fully cooked. If it's not fully cooked, it's a isur deraisa to put it back on the stove because now you're cooking on Shabbos. You took food that's not cooked fully. It's edible, but it's not cooked fully, and you're putting it onto the stove. It's already more than half of its cooking, and it's edible. Biblically, it's forbidden to put it back on. That's literally cooking on Shabbos. Even if it was completely cooked. Let's say it has soup, which means like a sauce. It has a liquid to it. We'll find it's stanin legamri, and it's already cooled off, which we're going to see in a moment. That when it's very cold, when it's completely cold, it's a problem. Also, another issue: you're putting something back on where it's has liquid in it and it's cooled off. Has an aspect of cooking to it. Okay, so what does it mean? Yeah, so he says here, what does it mean not that it's cooled off? It's not warm to eat. It's not the temperature that you want to eat it with. In other words, it's not to be freezing cold, but it's not the way that you would. It's not the way you would want to eat it. It's cooled off.
Then he also likes it.
Yeah. The dish has to be a little bit warm. We have a term in Hilchos Shabbos of what's considered hot. That if you put a finger, if a child would put their finger on it, it would scold, it would burn. That's how hot it is. So even if it's not really hot, there's a little warmth to it. You could put it back on. Even it's not in the gamri, if it got completely cooled off. Even if it's a dry dish, where there's no liquid involved in this type of food, it's very dry. You can't put it back. Once it got totally cooled off, it doesn't have that original placing, the fact that it was on the stove. But as if you're putting it onto the stove, which would be usher on Shabbos. Again, the whole condition here is that you're not cooking, and it doesn't look like you're cooking. It was already on the stove. You had, which is okay. You have to take out a little food, so you took it off the stove, so it shouldn't be mixing the dish, and you put it back on. You held on to it. You had it in mind. It's the same pot. It's still hot, or at least warm. All of these things. And if you're missing one of these conditions, then you're missing that original shehiyah, that original resting or placing. Now you want to put it back. It's as if you're putting it back again from scratch. What's the exception or the heter? What are you allowed to do on Shabbos? You could put something back on the fire, but you can't put it on the fire in the first place. That would look like cooking. Because that looks like you're cooking on Shabbos, which is not allowed. And therefore, these conditions are very, very important. Yesh Eimrim, Shalei Tzrichu Chacham Meshiyadait Lachzir Aveda B'Yadei, Elek Shnat L'Me'akira B'Yim Ubo Lachzir B'Shabbos. Now, there are different opinions. There is an opinion that says that this whole issue, that I have to have it in mind, that I'm taking it off for that reason, and I have to hold on to it, is only if it's not Shabbos yet. And took it off before Shabbos and putting it on Shabbos. Now, he's going to conclude in this paragraph, in this sif, that nonetheless we're careful about it on Shabbos itself. But there is an opinion that she'oz then if you took off the soup from the pot as an example, it was before Shkia, and you used it, and now you want to put it back on, then you have to hold on to it, then you have to have in mind, and so on. Because when once Shabbos began, it wasn't on the stove at all. But when you took it off from the pot, from the stove, once it was dark already, meaning it was already Shabbos, because when Shabbos began, this dish was already on the stove. Your whole problem, says this opinion, is that it's going to look like I put something on the stove on Shabbos. It was already on the stove when Shabbos started. Therefore, if this dish was already fully cooked, it did not become fully cooled off, there are those that have this custom. It's very good and it's appropriate to be machmer in this case. Machmer means that you have in mind and you hold on to it. And the same kli. Well, he didn't exclude the same kli even in this case. Just it's included, but he didn't. Even the Yesh Eimrim says you have to have the same dish. Because you should be careful, because there is most of opinions say that it doesn't matter if it's before Shabbos or on Shabbos. If you're taking it off the stove, you have to be careful that you put it back on. It should have these conditions so it doesn't look like you are doing something on Shabbos. Now, what's about putting things on next to the fire? And this is a common thing when people say, I want to warm up my challah, or I want to do something, I'm going to put it next to the stove, next to the thing. Now, it's done, but as we're going to learn, there's a difference between the blechs that we have today, especially when you have a regular stove and you just put a piece of metal on top, and then it's really next to the fire. It's not even covered. It's literally next to the fire. And there's a difference when you have a pot on the stove and you're putting it on top of that pot. So then there's really a break between the grufa ktuma and whatever you're putting. Well, let's see the basic halacha, and then we can explain it more. Chazara b'samach l'kira. Muter lismech deira shenizbashla itzel akira michutzala. You're allowed to put a dish which already was cooked next to the stove, outside of the stove. It wasn't on the stove before Shabbos. It's a different dish. You're not holding it, whatever. On Shabbos, you could go and put something, a dish. You want to warm it up a little bit, you could put it there. We're not afraid that you may play with the coals because they're not going to help you. It's outside of the stove. It also doesn't look like you're cooking on Shabbos because it's not how you cook. You don't put things next to a stove. It's not a way of doing it outside of the kira. Now, in Article 51, the footnote, he says that if the coals are not covered or taken away, then it's going to be a problem, and therefore you should be careful. And in the stoves that we have, not the newest blechs, but the old blechs. So you put a piece of metal on the stove. It's really not so grufa ktuma when it's on the side of it, because the fire it's like an open flame a little bit. So you really have to be careful. So,
Put it on top of the pot.
yeah, okay. So he's going to say if it's on the top of the pot and it's dry, then it would be different. But now we're talking about samach leish. We'll just finish this footnote here. The blech, the piece of metal that you put on top of the fire. It's a question in the first place if the side of this metal which is not really facing the fire, is really considered next to the fire, or maybe it's considered on the fire because it's kind of open. He goes on to say, but that it's questionable just to do that. If you're very careful, but we'll continue learning more of it.
Well, it's better to put You have a pot on the block and you put on top of that pot, it's better than put it next to the